In 2018, the southern Caribbean island nation of Trinidad and Tobago stood at a historic crossroads. The country could continue down the path of oppression that it had been set on by Christian colonial powers centuries ago, or it could finally embrace a free and fair future for its people. And on April 12, 2018, the country's high court decided on the latter when it passed down a landmark ruling that found the barbaric colonial-era laws that criminalized homosexuality were unconstitutional. It was a clear affirmation that LGBTQ people are entitled to live without fear of state-sponsored violence and subjugation, and it seemed to foreshadow a growing tolerance of queer people in Trinidad and Tobago society. For a brief moment, the country was hailed as a beacon of progress in the Caribbean, and this gave hope that other countries in the region that still criminalized gay relationships, like Jamaica and Grenada, might eventually follow this example and begin the process of dismantling their own hateful and baseless laws. But tragically, this is not at all what has come to pass. In fact, quite the opposite. As on March 25, 2025, the government of Trinidad and Tobago decided the country was done with human rights, and that it would instead begin sprinting backwards at full speed to create an even worse situation for its already most marginalized citizens by reinstating criminal penalties for those accused of being gay. This makes Trinidad and Tobago the only country in modern history to recriminalize homosexuality after it had been decriminalized. An unspeakably humiliating and shameful title that the island nation now holds. After 7 years of slow but steady healing, 7 years of tasting freedom, and 7 years of hopeful possibilities, the government has plunged the nation back into being a living nightmare and waking hell for its LGBTQ citizens, with this decision that is not only legally regressive, but morally indefensible. Like most terrible things, the root of this injustice can be found in history, and in particular with Sections 13 and 16 of the Sexual Offenses Act of 1861, which has for nearly 2 centuries punished individuals in consensual same-sex relationships with 25 years in prison. These laws were vestiges of Christian colonial rule, as both Spain and Britain have each taken turns forcing their religious extremism on the island nation over the centuries. But instead of an independent Trinidad and Tobago opposing the laws that had been previously forced upon it by foreign radicals over 150 years ago, in 1986, the newly sovereign government doubled down on this primitive colonial-era bigotry by adopting its own new and even more comprehensively oppressive laws against LGBTQ people, making the situation even worse for our community than before. It seemed this dark chapter in the country's history had finally come to a close in 2018, when these very laws were successfully challenged by human rights advocate Jason Jones, who brought the case forward on the grounds that they violated the constitutional protections of privacy, liberty, and equality. But opposition to the ruling was immediate and intense, particularly from religious institutions and conservative political actors. And though the ruling remained in effect for 7 years, it was never fully accompanied with any true legislative reform. Then, in late March of this year, these 2 justices on an appeals court in Trinidad and Tobago caved to conservative and religious lobbyists by reinstating similar criminal penalties to what the High Court had previously struck down. So now, as we speak, anyone in a same-sex relationship who is found by authorities can be sentenced to 5 years in prison. I wonder if the churches in the country are finally happy now that random queer people are back to being locked up. Hint, no, they never will be, until the entire world is under strict biblical law, which, another hint, is nearly identical to Islamic Sharia law at its core. And let's be extremely clear, the consequences of this reversal of basic human rights are not theoretical or abstract. The consequences are real, immediate, and life-destroying to queer people in the country. Police harassment, arrest, and violence towards LGBTQ individuals are not only tolerated, but now encouraged by the law. Familial abuse is now, once again, emboldened by the law, and employers, landlords, and healthcare providers are not merely allowed to discriminate against us, but are legally obliged to. The fact the country has chosen of its own accord to run back to theocratic oppression is likely unthinkable even to the adults in our community of Trinidad and Tobago. But for the country's LGBTQ youth, who grew up believing their country was moving towards equality, there is a deep wound that words cannot easily describe. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has sent a clear message to its own people and to the world that the country not only places no value on LGBTQ people's lives, but that it views them as a threat in need of incarceration. Perhaps it is self-evident, but trans people also have no rights in the country, and changing one's legal gender is completely illegal in all circumstances. Furthermore, as one would also likely assume, no anti-discrimination laws exist in the country, and conversion therapy is still legal and practiced throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Across the board, the situation is beyond dire. Now, some watching may be asking themselves why. Why would a country's leaders and courts put so much effort into persecuting our people? Well, the answer is terribly simple. Weak, incompetent, and failed leadership use the most vulnerable members of their society as a scapegoat for their inaptitude. They play to their base of uneducated, angry, and religious followers who need an easy target to blame their unhappy and poor lives upon. See, the GDP per capita of Trinidad and Tobago is more than $1,000 lower now than even in 2008, meaning the country has stagnated for almost 2 decades and has squandered the many opportunities that vast oil wealth, tourism, and a young population had given it. As such, leadership turns to attacking queer people instead of owning up to their own failures. A story we see around the world, and a tale as old as time. Covering up your incompetence by blaming those with the least power to make their voices heard. But what these leaders around the world fail to accept is that no society or country that aspires to prosperity or modernity can achieve such heights when stooping to such unfathomable lows. The betrayal of justice and liberty has never and will never lead to greatness. Unfortunately, there is no international force that will sweep in to defend us. We are, at this point in history, on our own. But that also does not mean we are entirely powerless to bringing about change and fighting with our time, our money, and our voices. The most potent form of resistance that many of us can do when a country violates basic human dignity is to make certain we are not enabling such abuses with our own resources. This can look like a suspension of travel and tourism to Trinidad and Tobago until the grotesque law criminalizing being gay is overturned. Divesting from any companies or portfolios that include the nation's primary exports of natural gas, ammonia, and iron ore. I am broke, and many of you watching are too, but for those who are invested in global markets, vote for a free world with where you put your money. And finally, do not be silent. Share the plight of LGBTQ people in Trinidad and Tobago with sympathetic leaders in your country, and discourage anyone you know who may be considering a trip to such anti-queer destinations. Spreading awareness and withholding the so-called pink dollar should never be underestimated, as doing so can have unforeseen and powerful impacts. Sadly, it will likely take a massive wake-up call for the government to change its course, especially considering that the vast majority of those polled in the country oppose LGBTQ people's right to exist. But this does not mean that all hope is lost. Many brave activists in Trinidad and Tobago continue to fight for liberation, and our global community has so much power through how we spend our money, where we spend our time, and the way we use our voices. The fact we are having to cover this story in 2025 is not only intellectually absurd, it is truly deranged. To the judges who reintroduced this archaic and unforgivable law, and to the institutions that have supported it, history will not remember you kindly. And to those in Trinidad and Tobago who opposed this injustice, activists, attorneys, citizens, we see you, we stand with you, and we believe in your courage. You deserve a free and safe future. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. One day, this court and government will be gone, this law will be overturned, and things truly will get better. And now, for today's queer news story, we have an encouraging development out of Puerto Rico, where on June 2nd, 2025, its own Supreme Court ruled that non-binary people are now allowed to select X as a gender-neutral marker on official documentation, like birth certificates. This massive victory for LGBTQ rights means that if Puerto Rico were an independent country, it would now be tied with Germany and Chile as the 5th best in the world for queer rights overall, and would also be the 16th in the world to legally recognize non-binary people. Puerto Rico shows that even though much of the world is moving in the wrong direction, including most jurisdictions in the USA, some places are continuing to improve their laws and become ever more free and open to our people. So, well done to Puerto Rico. Hopefully, the idiots in Washington, D.C. will one day take some notes and learn what an actual love for liberty looks like in practice. Thank you, friends, for watching and spending time today with me as we seek to spread the word about important topics in the community. For those interested, you are more than welcome to stay around and join our increasingly powerful kingdom here on YouTube as we fight for our future. Until next time, QK out.